Hey guys, it's your Bland Boys, Mark and Taha here, and we're back with another one. And today we're going to have a bit of more of a meaty conversation about condition options in Bland and going into how to actually implement them and show you enough examples that actually make sense because it can be a bit overwhelming. And we notice that the more structured your conditions, the better the outcome. Right,
I'm
Taha?
actually I'm super excited for this video. Literally, I wish this is the video that we're filming. I wish I would have seen this like 3 months ago, but it is what it is. A lot of the stuff we had to find out on our own. I had a conversation. I mentioned this in the last video, but I think it's important. We had a conversation a couple days ago with the owners of Bland just to make sure to sort of bounce ideas off, make sure that the information we're providing here is backed up by them, at least to the best of our ability. Of course, we can make mistakes, but as people who have been deploying agents for past couple of months now, this is kind of the accumulation of all of our findings. Same format as last time, where I've got a Google Doc, super handy to sort of hit really good bullet points, and then when appropriate, I'll jump back and forth between Google Doc and Bland to not only tell you about it, but also show you. Sounds good?
Sounds amazing. Let's get it.
All right.
All right, you going to share your screen?
Yes, sir.
Perfect. And for anyone in the audience right now, this is going to be a bit meatier than last time. So if you want, this is your chance to get that water or coffee and sit down because it's going to be a bit of a long one.
Yeah, and it will be definitely a long one. There's a lot of nuance in this. It's also probably one of the most important aspects in Bland that I would get wrong all the time, and it caused me a lot of frustration. But it's kind of one of more of those subtle changes that they make that's actually super super powerful. So this is dedicated to how to use conditions within your AI agent within Bland. The first rule of thumb, and by the way, before I actually dive into this, for anybody who's not aware about what a condition is within Bland. By the way, for those who are unaware of what Bland is, or maybe you're not super familiar, we have a whole video dedicated to just the overview of the platform. But in this case, I'm going to focus really on the conditions aspect of it. Within Bland, there's nodes, right? And you can connect nodes with different labels or pathways. Now, within specific nodes or cards, there is a super important option right here, and I'll zoom in, which is called condition options. Now, what this does, or what this allows you to do, is that this will force the agent to not move on to the next card until you have fulfilled a specific condition. Now, the best example I have here is this is a roofing company and somebody calls in, right? The first thing that we're telling them, according to this prompt, is basically introduce yourself to the caller, welcome them to Superior Roofing, and ask them how you can assist. Now, what tends to happen here, and the reason why it's so important to have conditions in a lot of the major nodes is because Bland has a bias in practice where if the condition is fulfilled, it will try to advance the conversation by advancing in the nodes here. And a really common problem that can happen is when you're having a conversation on the phone, people immediately, they might not realize it's a robot. And they'll always say stuff like, hey, how's it going? Just as an introductory how can you say it? As an like just as a hello, they'll ask a question that can throw off the entire agent because it will try to move forward as it will consider that a question. Now, what this does is that it blocks that in the sense that now if I say test pathway, and I say, hey, if I can write,
Yeah, if you can.
how's it going? Thanks for calling Superior Roofing. What can I help you with? It has not deemed the condition as been fulfilled, so it will not move on to a different card. It can happen really, really often if you don't have the condition where it will just simply try to move on. Now, I think I fine tuned this model, so it might not work, but let's try it.
And what does fine tuning mean if someone's clicking
Oh,
on
yeah,
this video for the first time?
correct. Fine tuning is this little super handy option right at the bottom of your screen. But what this allows you to do is fine tuning allows you to deal with a lot of the edge cases in the sense that it's difficult to prompt for every single variable that a user can put in or what they can say. So let's say, for example, if you're having trouble prompting it out of the pathway that you want or prompting it into the pathway you want, what you do is you use this little option here called fine tuning. And what this allows you to do, or actually this it would be right here. And what this does is it tells you what the agent decided in the background, and you can then go ahead and actually edit that or tell it, hey, look, no, you took the wrong decision. This is what you should have taken. This is what direction you should have taken, what no you should have went to, or what you should have said. You did. So in other words, you can either tell it where to go or what to say. And you can change it. So for example, if I liked that it's saying the same no, but I just didn't like what it said, I can say something else here. It'd be like, welcome, y'all, to Superior, right? And you can do that a couple of times, and this will actually catch a lot of the edge cases, we call them, where
Yeah.
it's very difficult to predict what somebody's going to say.
Yeah, we can do a whole video just on fine tuning, but that's kind of the TLDR if you just want to know what Tahoe's referring to.
Correct.
Yeah.
So back to conditions. The most important part, and a lot of the troubles that at least we had when building these agents initially, was the agent would it would just keep moving. It would go to different cards and it wouldn't fulfill it. A really common one is email addresses or phone numbers or names or a combination of all of them. And somebody would be like, um, oh, they wouldn't give either their name or their full name, right? They'd be like, "What's your name?" "Oh, it's Taha." "Well, what's your last?" It wouldn't ask for the last name because it would consider that as a name and would just move on. But if you condition it and say, "Look, you need the full first and last name," it will not move on until they provide both of them.
Yep.
Super, super useful. Then going back into my little super handy doc. So this is straight from the Bland team. Their suggestion: implement conditions on every node. Now I am guilty, unfortunately, of not doing it for every single one, but I'm getting better at it. But it's a really, really powerful tool, and they suggest to use them more and to make them good. Because a lot of times, even I'm guilty of this, you'll just make them super basic or too broad is a huge problem. So I have a really, really good example. Let's say you need 5 data points before you
Mm.
want to move on to the next card, right? And this is for a travel booking agent.
Mm.
You want to make sure that in order to give the best suggestions to the caller, well, you need 5 things. You need to know these 5 things before actually being able to proceed. You need the departure city, where are they located at, the arrival city, departure date, return date, and number of people. All of these must be provided. And this is an example of a good condition. This will not move on until they give all of this. But if I say something like, oh, the condition is that the user gives travel details, that can mean literally anything in the sense that, oh, yeah, well, we want to go to Mexico.
Right.
Where are you coming from? When do you want to leave? Is this something you want to do tomorrow? Is it in summer? The agent has no idea. But since technically they did give some details, it'll just move on and start suggesting things, which makes for a really negative customer experience because it's very, very rarely, if ever, what they're expecting. It's just you have to keep in mind a lot of these users, they will try to give you the least amount of information possible, and you have to try to like pry it out of them, which is why you specifying exactly what you need in order to make the best decision or to give the best suggestions has been a game changer for us. Literally all of my conditions here, and I'll show you one where we have literally like 11 conditions before I can move on. It helps do so much. Now, one question actually that I posed myself when we were starting to build a lot of these things was, why not make these different nodes or different cards, right? In the sense that you could separate this entire thing into 5 different nodes within Bland, right? So you could have one that says get the user's departure date, and then you can have another one that says get the user's arrival date, etc., etc. So 5 different cards. In theory, it sounds cool. In practice, it makes it a lot more difficult because human beings rarely are linear like that. So say, oh yeah, we're leaving on Tuesday. We want to go to Mexico. Oh yeah, but by the way, we're from Montreal. And what else do you need? And it's very, very difficult, or in practice, to actually have 5 different nodes and people listen to them. Because people jump around, right? They'll say, oh yeah, my name's Taha. I want to go to Mexico on the 3rd. What's the last name? We don't have it. How do you account for all of that? The simplest way is to just concentrate instead of separating into 5 different cards. Just have one card to get information, and the agent is smart enough in the background to understand I've got their name, I've got their phone number, but I'm missing their last name. So we're like, all right, perfect. And now give me your last name and I can continue this booking for you. Does
Right.
that
So
make sense, Mark?
yeah, so it's better at accounting for nuance if you put it all together. So instead
Correct.
of "Hey, I'm Taha, Taha El Harti, and I want to book a flight to Mexico,"
Mhm.
some humans will be like, "Hey, I'm Mark. My aunt just came down from overseas, and we're looking to do a family trip in Mexico." So it'll account for all this different added knowledge or added intent that wasn't really programmed at to begin with. Is that fair?
Yeah, 100%. And just in practice, it's even easier to maintain because keep in mind, if you have different cards and different nodes, each of them needs a condition. Even from the user's perspective, it's really clunky
Hmm.
because they can't give all the information at once. If you tell, hey, look, I just need your name, your phone number, your email. Some people will say, yeah, my name's Taha, phone number is XYZ, email address is taha@gmail.com. Other ones, but if they try to say that, be like, all right, perfect, I have your name. Now give me your number and now
Right.
give me your email. It can be a really clunky experience, which doesn't really benefit anybody.
Absolutely.
And from a maintenance perspective, it's also a lot easier to change just this. So if you don't need this anymore, you can just remove it from the condition and then boom, you're done. You don't need it. But if you have removing the whole card, making sure that the agent still performed as expected while removing the whole node is a lot more work.
Absolutely.
So that's probably the biggest point, or if you retain anything from this video, I'm super glad we started with this because this is the most important part in the entire video. If you take anything from this, is make your conditions look like this. Even stuff at the bottom like this, like all of these must be provided, is crucial to making sure this works well. Now, I'll got a couple more examples here because I think this is really where a lot of stuff that I sort of misunderstood or didn't understand super well came from. Let's see, for example, you want to collect user information for a loan. Well, just tell it, look, the user needs to provide full name, date of birth, social security, annual income, employment status, if anything. And I like to put these as well. If any of these details are missing, AI should prompt the user to provide the required information. So just tell it. Or an example of a bad one, to just make it super broad and be like, yeah, well, look, if they put in the personal information, that's fine enough. Well, how personal are we getting? How broad can it be? It doesn't know. So, and it will tend to just move forward, which can be really complex or really kind of a pain. Because if, for example, you need their phone number and their email, and they give their email, but not their phone number, and then you say, okay, perfect, I'll just text that to you on your phone number that it thinks it has because it's prompted as you need to text them. Well, now you're kind of stuck.
Right. So key takeaway is being succinct but hyper specific at the same time,
Correct.
not just being succinct.
Correct. And there's two, I guess, trains of thought that can occur. There's mandatory data points, which means stuff that I actually need, and I'll touch on this actually. You know what? Let me just skip ahead a little bit. I might be playing, but there's mandatory and there's optional conditions. So a really important point is the distinction between, and this is a term that we came up with, which is mandatory data points and optional data points. So for example, here, and this also is kind of like a sneak peek into that you can put a lot of conditions within these nodes. And here I've got 11 different conditions, and it has to hit all of them, and it will not move on until it has literally all of 11 of them. Now, as we're talking about gathering data points and important ones, two things I want to highlight right here, and I skipped ahead a little bit, but the two main things are especially useful now is there's such a thing as a mandatory data point and there's an optional one. For example, here, when it's asking for an emergency contact, the asking portion is mandatory, but the gathering the secondary contacts information like their email, their phone number, and all that, you can prompt it to actually just be optional. Be like, look, if there is a secondary, we use it for construction all the time. If there is a secondary homeowner, we'll ask for the name, ask for the phone number, ask for their email. So you can have within the condition mandatory and optional data points to collect. Just a little tangent there.
Yeah, and if anyone's wondering, if you want access to this Google Doc, we're going to give it in the description below. No opt-in needed, just the direct link here.
Yeah. Just because there is a lot of information here, and I don't want to bore you guys by just reading through it, but feel free to pause or to read the actual doc itself, which will also help us. There's a bunch of examples in here, and seeing these examples is probably the most useful thing within this entire document because it just shows you how this AI thinks and how to prompt it to get the result that at least we're looking for.
Yep.
Okay. Now, I guess we're back here. Conditions are actually, and this is from the Bland team themselves, are actually, people underestimate how powerful the conditions are. They're basically sub prompts. They're taken as seriously as the main prompt. You can have, I think the number they gave us was you can have a condition that's 100,000 characters long. You can have entire prompts within the conditions. It's a really, really powerful tool that people just underestimate because it's hidden right here, right?
Yeah, so it's kind of like promptception. You have a prompt within a
Exactly.
prompt within a prompt. Yeah.
It's super powerful stuff. And
Yeah.
like I just showed earlier, we have in this one, I think the one with the most we have is 11. Actually, no, it's 14 because on the construction ones, we asked for secondary homeowner's first name, last name, phone number. Yeah, I think those are the 3 data points in there. But you can go, and also what this helps to do is this cleans up your view so much because before, what I was doing was patient's first name, one card, right? And this is what I was kind of referring to earlier, Mark, where you'd have patient's first name. They've given it, all right, perfect. And then the second one, and the third one. And even when you're dealing, if you're like, let's say, for example, you're in an agency building this for other people, it's a lot more work to have to delete cards and just have to delete a specific sentence within a condition. So this just helps it and it makes the conversation so much more natural because the agent basically analyzes what it needs and asks for what it needs specifically. It doesn't have to be a linear pattern. It doesn't have to be first name, then last name, then phone number. If the user gives a phone number first, that's great. Now I need your first name and your last name. And it will just keep going back and forth until it has every single data point that you need.
Yeah,
Super
and
powerful stuff.
if you are lazy, so if you go back to that, if you are lazy like I am, what I would do is I would go to this Google Doc. I would take this example. I would paste it as a screenshot in something like a ChatGPT. I would enter your use case and say, "Hey, make me condition options written in the same format," and then you can kind of cheat time by using our format without writing it yourself. Because one thing we're working towards is building a custom GPT where we just give it the scenario and it spits out a very detailed, bespoke amount of condition options. So that's just a bit of a nugget in case you're looking at this and it looks daunting.
Oh man, must be nice. Now, moving on from the conditions or moving on from the data points collections aspect, the positive and negative outcomes is actually also super powerful. One thing that you might, I mean, I overlook this all the time, is let's use the email, gathering the person's email. Some people don't have emails. What do you do in that case? Well, it can get pretty awkward if the only condition is get this person's email address. And I'm guilty of this as well. And one thing that even I was told by the Bland guys to focus on more or to make your agents better and more malleable is what happens or adding within your conditions. Basically, if the user says that they do not have an email address or they do not have what it is that you're looking for, you have to give them an out. You cannot simply force them. Otherwise, it'll be stuck in a loop where they literally cannot do anything if they don't have an email address. So what that means is a good example of this would be you must gather the user's email address unless they explicitly mention that they do not have one or are uncomfortable sharing. Which means that if they're just being lazy, be like, oh yeah, whatever, just 123 at gmail.com.
Yeah.
Well, that doesn't work. We need an actual email address. Unless they specifically mention, look, I don't have an email address or I don't want to share that. Then you need to have that still needs to fulfill the condition unless it's mandatory for whatever it is that you need to do. For example, if you're going to go visit a house and they're booking an appointment, well, then you need the address. It's not like it's mandatory. If you can't,
Yeah.
you kind of, well, I guess even in that case, I'll remember, I'm going to backtrack right there. Even in that case, you would have to make it as a fulfilled condition, but then use a different pathway label into like a live transfer to an agent, for example, because the issue is there is just uncomfortableness. They still need it, but they just aren't willing to share it to you.
Got it. Okay.
That's positive and negative outcomes. Then edge cases and exceptions. This, I've got an amazing example for you guys about this. So a lot of times, people when they realize this is a robot, and they will start acting funny, right? They'll just be hilarious. Then one thing that you have to do, or when you're making these conditions, is the ability, or you have to basically tell the AI to check for weird entries. Like if you're doing this for like I don't know, a senior home, right? And the person calls in to say, oh yeah, well I'm 20. Well, senior homes don't accept 20. So you have to basically condition it or write in the prompt that, look, make sure that this is a valid entry. And I won't go over this because it's a long transcript. But the reason why you want to do this is to give your agent like room to navigate when you get transcripts like these, right? Now I'll let you guys read it at your own pace. Feel free to pause. But the agent actually went back to us afterwards and told us, look, all the entries didn't seem super serious, but you still need some way to allow it to continue the conversation, even if actually this probably wasn't prompted well enough because it should have stopped there and be like, look, like give me a serious entry or I cannot help you. Does that make sense, Mark?
Yeah, it makes perfect sense.
Combine conditions with fine tuning. Okay, we're in the home stretch. Conditions fine tuning is kind of what we mentioned in the other video, but fine tuning is the, I guess you could call like the cherry or the cherry on top of the cake at the end of it, right? Cherry on the icing, which is basically if the condition isn't good enough or if it isn't producing the outcomes that you want, whenever you're testing stuff. And Mark, I know you mentioned this and you had a great question in the last one, but if the condition that you're putting and you're prompting it well and you think it should work, but it just isn't, you're missing some of it. Like there's just too much nuance within the conversation. Your best friend in that case is going to be in Pathways Decision when you're testing your agents. And if you don't do this already, by the way, a much faster way to test your agents, instead of doing call now, you just use this, right? Whenever you do test pathway, I mean, this will also show up if you're just calling it, but it's just faster to do it this way.
Yeah.
Let's say you're doing how many I sent you today? Just looking around, right? That's great. Is there any specific questions or concerns? Now, what I want to see is if I can find a really good edge case. Um, uh, what I'm trying to find, or the reason what I'm trying to illustrate here, is that if the condition is being met or it's not being met and it's just not responding the way you want it to, your last resort or a really powerful tool that you can use at your disposal is this little pen icon in the pathway of decision. And what this tells you actually is it shows you in the back end what decisions did Bland make to get here. So, for example, if it thinks that the condition has been achieved but it hasn't, well, you can change it right here. If it's going down the wrong path, you can change it here. This is kind of the cherry on the icing that if you don't want to over prompt, you can always just use fine tuning. And we found that after the number right now that I'm at is 3 to 5, meaning you'll try three sort of fine tunings where you'll show it the wrong path. You'll say, no, you're wrong. This is the actual one or the actual right path. After 3 to 5, it basically gets it right, at least in our tests, 98, 95% of the time. So super, super powerful tool that I leave at the end because it's the one that you also have the least amount of control over, right? Fine tuning is just you did the bad decision, change the actual model to just choose something else. But it's difficult to go back, keep in mind, unless you just start fine tuning in the opposite direction.
So what if we ask something a bit more off the cuff here and just see how it reacts?
Sure.
Um, my house just burnt down. I need a replacement right now. What do I do?
If I can write.
I mean, LLMs will correct you, so you're good. Your own. What would you like to say? Translate right away. And actually, this is actually a really, really good point. This is probably the most useful case of conditions right here, at least that I've found. So within global nodes, the global nodes will like within the transfer. This is kind of just like an edge case. I think Bland. I'm sure they're working on fixing it, but Bland is super sensitive to transfers. Meaning, right here, it tried to transfer me in the sense that I didn't ask to be transferred. I said, "What do I do?" That's
But it
awesome. Yeah, so
that's
it's dynamic to listening for when it might not know the answer at all. So let's make the answer again. Let's push it and say I'm pretty much homeless right now. Comma. Do you offer any short-term stays while you fix my roof?
while I'll fix my roof.
It's all good.
I'm really sorry to hear about the situation. Unfortunately, we don't offer any short-term stays. However, we can definitely help you with your roofing needs and expedite the process as much as possible. Would you like to schedule a quick call for experts to
I
get
mean,
started?
that's a reasonable answer.
I mean, that's as reasonable as it gets, right? Like,
Yeah.
what else? Even a person, what else are they really supposed
What
to
are they
say?
gonna
Like,
do
come
for
stay at
you?
my house. So
Exactly.
it's and fine tuning basically allows you like, let's say for example, let's say you didn't like this answer, you don't want to say this. What I would do is basically I would just go all the way down, right, and then you find the first pen icon, and here you can change a bunch of different stuff. But then I say, let's say I want this to actually say, I don't know, sucks to be you, right? Just as a just as an example, if I save that. Now keep in mind, if you do that 3 or 4 times, now it won't take it seriously until probably number 3 or 4. Then it will actually just always start repeating that over and over and over again. Be careful with it because, like I said, if you go down, it will start saying that stuff, and if it's not what you wanted to say, kind of a pain to go back to the way it originally was.
It's a solid shortcut to go bankrupt business. So
Yeah, yeah, you could do that as well if you really want to. But that's when it comes to fine tuning. That's how it ties into conditions. I think I had a couple more here. Can obviously continuously review and update them, right? If you notice that people are always asking about a new feature, or if you notice that, yeah, I mean, if you know people are they ask about a certain thing, you can have a condition or to what's the word? Or if you know people are having a certain problem, right? And then you know that the solution to this problem is, let's say, to just turn the device on and on. Well, then you can make it a condition. Make sure before you do, let's say, before you do a live transfer, make sure that you've told or that the user has told you whether they've attempted to do a turn off or turn off. You can set that as the condition, and then it will not move on until the user explicitly mentions that they have tried to turn off, turn back on option. They're like, all right, perfect. Now let's transfer you to an actual human.
Right. Okay.
Because
So
if you see, yeah, go ahead.
with transfers, like,
Yeah,
do you have control over when it automatically makes a transfer, or is it kind of based on Bland's judgment?
sure. Here's some sauce for people who are, if you've stuck around this long, because I know it's a heavy video, some sauce.
Here's a nugget.
So Bland at the moment is very, very sensitive to transfers, meaning a mere mention of transfer, like sometimes before, even if it's a couple months, a couple weeks back, a second it would suggest to transfer, and it would just start transferring. It would just start calling, and it was really, really frustrating because I didn't understand why I was doing it. Now, the workaround we found for that with transfers is, let's say here I've got a global node, and we've got another video coming about global node, or it might already be uploaded. But point is that we have a global node that detects whenever the user wants to be transferred, or whenever Bland thinks it wants to be transferred. And what we've done is this is basically a blank static box, which means that this doesn't say anything, but is still a card in a node, right? And the condition here is that the user wants to speak to a live agent, or they should choose the user, or they choose this pathway if the user says they want to be transferred. Now, what we do is we enable forwarding. What this says is that this will not say the actual dialogue, so it won't say anything in this node, and it goes to this card right here. And what this does is this creates a friction point between when Bland thinks the user wants to be transferred compared to when the user actually wants to be transferred. What this does is that it says, look, confirm whether or not the user or they want to be transferred. Do not move on until the user tells you whether they want to be transferred. What this does is it allows an opportunity to be like, hey, look, are you actually looking to be transferred or no? And then if they say no, they just go back straight back into the knowledge base, right? Does that make sense? Because I
Yeah,
had a lot of trouble with
yeah,
this.
totally makes sense. It's like again, I like to be the TLDR guy. So
I got you.
minimal control right now. If I say I want to speak to an agent, I want to speak to a human, transfer me to someone else, it usually will pick that up probably 8 times out of 10. Is that fair?
Oh no, it'll do it every time. The
Every
thing
time.
is, it
Okay.
does it too much. That's the problem.
Okay.
In the sense that somebody, like, let's say you're calling, right? You're like, yeah, my house burned down. If you saw there, that would have transferred me automatically to a user. But I didn't say I want to be transferred. I just told you my house burned down. Like,
Right.
I don't want to be transferred. Wait, hold on. And it got super finicky to the point where it was transferring people who said they don't want to be transferred, but because the word transfer was simply
Transfers in there.
mentioned,
Yeah.
it's like, oh, transfer. I
Gotcha.
gotta do my job, right?
Yeah.
So we added this friction point right here to stop that from happening. So the user has to explicitly say, yeah, sure, I'd like to be transferred.
Yes. You're basically purposely putting a speed bump to make sure that it's less likely to go to transfer.
Yes, correct. Because
Yeah.
it was starting to become like genuinely an issue, and this is the best workaround we found.
Yep.
Going back in here, Bland's flexibility and specificity. Of course, like actually, a really good example here is you want to be specific, but you want to be flexible enough. And also, you don't want to spend a bunch of time trying to prompt every single situation that could happen. A really good example of this is, let's say you have a restaurant or you're trying to find somebody's dietary restrictions, right? Well, what you could do is, instead of saying like, instead of having they have to be either vegan or carnivore or kosher or halal or whatever, well, you need to give them some sort of out. You need to, because some people just won't fit within any of these clear defined buckets. They'll have a little bit of everything or a little bit of nothing. Well, what you want to do in that case, or a good practice, is a better way to say that, is you need to find, and this is the condition itself, you need to find the user's culinary preference before moving on. This should ideally be one of the following categories, right? So either no dietary restrictions, either vegan, either carnivore, either halal, either kosher, or if the user explicitly mentions that they do not fit within any of the above categories, you must then understand what specific restrictions they have before moving on. Meaning, sure, if they say, look, I'm not any of these, well, okay, what can't you eat or what can you eat, etc.
What
Just
if
an
you're
out.
what would happen here if I was very explicit and you asked me that question? I said, I'm on a diet where all I can eat is green apples.
It would consider that as a condition fulfilled.
Okay, got it.
Yeah. Yeah. This is kind of now the problem is if you don't include this, right? And because here it says this should ideally, okay, now then I fixed this one to be this should ideally be, but in most cases you shouldn't put you must unless there's no variability at all. Let's say, for example, you have a car mechanic shop and you do both cars and motorcycles. Well, then if somebody comes and says, look, I need a repair, Well, the only two possible options are cars or bikes. That's it. So there's no need for the rest. But if your condition can apply to a couple of different buckets, but can also be something completely else, something completely different, you need to account for that
Right.
in order
Okay.
to make it as useful as possible. Otherwise, you'll say, no, it has to be one of these. Which one is it?
Perfect.
And I think we kind of did the big tour of all of the conditions. I know this was a long one. I know there's a lot to go through, but that's why we need the Google Doc is just run through it. Look at the examples. By far, at least to us, the most useful part of this was the examples because it kind of encapsulates everything that we're talking about. And any questions, Mark? Anything that I maybe should didn't explain correctly?
No, I think you explained everything really well. When it comes to this stuff, especially conditions, it's all about practicing and it's very much monkey see, monkey do. So you can read this 5, 6 times, but until you actually build out these pathways and experiment with it and actually call and test, you won't realize the value of the conditions until you're forced to actually write them. So the next steps for you, if you're watching this, is look through this Google Doc, look at our examples, test it out on your end, and then you'll get it after the third, fourth time of actually trialing it out.
Well, there you go. All right, guys. Well, thanks for watching. Look, there's so much we could go over on this topic. And by the way, if there's any questions, any concerns, anything that maybe I didn't explain the best, feel free to drop in the comments. We love making these videos. But homework for you guys, if you're watching this and you're actually interested in building these things, although I can sit here and talk all day and we can go back and forth, me and Mark, about what to do and how to build these, the only way you'll actually learn how to do this is by to actually do it. First step of action, read the Google Doc. Second step, get into Bland, start building, start using conditions. And whenever you have trouble, either get on Discord, look it up, or just ask in the comments, and we'll try our very best to help you guys out. Thank you for
And
watching. We have a couple more of these in the pipeline. Am I wrong?
no, you're right. We got a couple more coming. And if you are an agency or a business and you watch this and you kind of get it, but you know you don't want to do it, we are taking on clients right now on a recurring basis. So if you want us to build it for you, that's an option too. And we'll give you some ways to reach out to us in the comments as well. So thanks a lot. And yeah, we'll see us in the next one.
Thank you.